Hello, and welcome back to another jam-packed episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and today I want to talk a little bit about the most glorious of all the kettlebell lifts. In fact, the czar of kettlebell lifts, as it is known, and of course I'm speaking of none other than the kettlebell snatch. I want to go into a little bit of the history of the movement by itself, meaning even before the snatch was the sort of a thing that people were doing a lot of in the kettlebell world, like a great many movements. It predates a lot of the stuff that we are doing today. So I'll go into a little bit of detail momentarily. Before I do, one of the other things that I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention is that if you want to get strong from head to toe to begin with and make sure that you are also getting your entire body working together as one solid unit rather than some Frankenstein like collection of parts, thanks to training like the glossy bodybuilding magazines would have you believe you should, then my 9 minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge would be right up your alley. And it primarily focuses on what I think is probably the most important, if not the most important, of all movement patterns, which is the gait pattern. The better you are and the stronger you are at your gait pattern or your walking pattern, the easier a great many other things becomes almost automatically. So, not only that, but movements that help to strengthen the gait pattern are very natural and they're very quick to learn. So within like 30 seconds, you can learn most of these things. I detail them in the 9 minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. I recommend that you get your own copy if you have not already. All you got to do is go to 9minutechallenge.com and it is all yours. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about the one arm kettlebell snatch. And even before that, I want to just talk about the one arm snatch in general because, I always kind of marvel at just how much the fitness industry changes from decade to decade, from year to year. But then you look back at like really long time ago in the world of training, and things were quite a bit more interesting. Let's just say that. If you think about, let's say, weightlifting competitions, and I don't mean strictly Olympic lifting competitions, because there used to be a great many other what were called odd lifts that you could contest and get records in and all this other stuff. There was just all sorts of fun stuff. Powerlifting, for instance, was and initially started off as a competition on various different odd lifts. And so, for instance, there was like I think the squat from I think it was a back squat, bench press from the bottom up, meaning you had to press from the bottom position. So you didn't unrack it, lower it to your chest, and then press it. You had to start from the chest and press it from there. And then also the barbell curl. I believe those were the first movements tested in the original powerlifting contest. And so people for a long time have cared about more than just, let's say in the barbell world, bench, squat, and deadlift, or the two hand clean and jerk, the two hand snatch, and so on and so forth. There was a time at which one arm movements were extraordinarily popular. If you look at any of like the old time strongmen, for instance, it was super common to see, heavy bent press, or which is of course a one-armed movement, the single arm clean and jerk, things of this nature, a variety of other, oddball stuff like the continental, which would be it's like you'd get the kettlebell or not the kettlebell, but rather a barbell up to your stomach, and you would kind of like roll it up to your chest and then press it from there. Just all sorts of cool stuff, and most people don't really do it now, as it would seem, because there is just too much of an emphasis on the stuff that you can contest in like an international competition. But in those early days, in those primordial days of what I would now call traditional strength training, there was a lot of different and cool stuff. And one of the things that really stood out head and shoulders above everything else was one arm movements, particularly the one arm snatch. Now they don't originate with kettlebells per se. It's just a movement that people have done for a very long time. I'll tell you in a little bit why I think the kettlebell snatch stands head and shoulders above some of these other ones. But I also want to pay a very serious homage to the luminaries of the past for their unbelievable abilities in the one arm snatch. And specifically, people would do them a lot with dumbbells. There's a specific technique that you would need to use for dumbbells. My friend Pavel Matzek, who's a master SFG in Prague, Czech Republic, has a whole course around these, and he has sort of like resurrected this old school dumbbell lifting technique. And one of the things that he focuses on, of course, is is the dumbbell snatch. With one thing that just stands out right off the bat is that with dumbbell and barbell snatching, you're not doing a bunch of reps ordinarily. It's like it's like one explosive movement, and you might do them, maybe do a couple with a little bit of rest in between them, but it's not like the higher rep quick lifts that you can do with the kettlebell in general. So there's definitely not a set of 10 uh, let's say one arm barbell snatches that you're doing. But nevertheless, because the so much of the old school upon which my system is based in part, as well as upon which a great many other systems are based as well, I think it only makes sense to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about some of the incredible things that people were able to do with the one arm barbell snatch. And in particular, I want you to take note of the body weight that people were training at, because people were a lot smaller on average back in the day. There was not a bunch of heavyweights running around lifting big weights. But I was looking this up today, and I was just like gobsmacked at how impressive some of these lifts were. Simon Bauer, who's a German strongman, could one arm snatch 163 pounds at 141 pounds of body weight. Odo Arko, who I believe was Polish, could one arm snatch 136 pounds at 138 pounds of body weight. Maxick, his full name was Max Sick, but his promoter, Tromp van Biggelen, I think was his name, was a Dutch guy, thought people would not want to buy, courses, and they wouldn't want to, follow a guy whose last name was Sick. So he just kind of mushed his name into one thing. Maxick was 147 pounds, but he could one arm snatch 165 pounds with a barbell. And what's especially impressive about Maxick, by the way, is that by and large, most of his training just involved what he called muscle control, which is just isometric contractions held for certain amounts of time or varying intensities or done, in a particular order. He had a really, very interesting system, and it's kind of was really fallen out of favor, but it produced some incredible results. Joseph Wurr, who was another German strongman, 138 pounds, one arm snatched, 145. Emil Clement was from Austria, 141-pound snatch at 130 pounds of body weight. R.G. Shorthouse, Australian, 151-pound one-arm snatch at 136 pounds of body weight. Alfred Neuland, who I believe was Estonian, 181-pound one-arm snatch. Listen to this, at 149 pounds of body weight. So a good degree above his body weight. He could snatch on one arm. George Hackenschmidt. Doesn't really surprise anybody, I don't think, because Hackenschmidt was just a phenom all around. He's the guy who is credited with inventing the hack squat, which is where you hold a weight behind you and then squat down and let your heels come up. There's some dispute as to whether or not he actually invented it, but nevertheless, there's really no dispute that he is the progenitor of the bench press. So this guy's a very, very important guy in strength training history. Weighed 190 pounds. He could one arm barbell snatch 197 pounds. And last, but absolutely not least, a Frenchman who still holds the world record well over 100 years later for the one arm snatch, 256 pounds on a barbell at 225 pounds of body weight. Unbelievable. These records haven't even come. I don't think anybody's come close to touching them. The closest is in modern era is Mikhail Koklayev, who's a very beefy Olympic lifter out of Russia. He weighs like 160 kilograms, which is something like 360 pounds. One arm barbell snatched 242. So compare that 160 kilograms versus Charles Rigoulot, who was 100 kilograms or 225 pounds versus 350 pounds. And Rigoulot still one arm snatched even more. Just unbelievable. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to start with these barbell numbers in particular is because I wanted to focus on the body weight of the people putting that kind of weight over their head. The big thing with the kettlebell snatch among trainees is that, number one, people aspire to do it, which is great. It's exactly what they should do because it's an awesome movement. But a lot of people, it also like inspires a certain level of like fear because they're like, oh gosh, this is going to be difficult. But the reality is that, first of all, yes, it is difficult. All things that are worth doing tend to be difficult. but it's nowhere close to what your abilities would be if you just train it seriously. And it's not to say that, you're not serious about it, but if your mentality is such that, oh, this is going to be too much, this is too much for me, this is too crazy, or what have you, then you are much more likely to hold yourself back subconsciously. So knowing what people were able to do, like these luminaries that I mentioned earlier, at number one, much lower body weights, and number two, with much more challenging living situations. They didn't have the benefits of modern medicine. Similarly, if you got injured in your training, that could just be it. Your career could be over. Um, you make one wrong move, you tear a muscle or damage a ligament or something like that, and it was not a fun time. And nevertheless, they trained seriously. They were very focused. They only pushed themselves when they felt that they had a good chance of being able to actually perform as they desired, and really quite inspirational. Again, like I said, guys like Charles Rigoulot, who were one arm snatching 256 pounds, well over 100 kilos. Like those are almost difficult to it's almost difficult to imagine, because most people who weigh 225 are not 225 pounds of solid muscle. But there are plenty of people, big or small, who can look at, let's say, what Alfred Neuland did, who weighed 149 pounds and one arm snatched 181, and say, okay, well, if he can do that, certainly, I can snatch to 24 kilo kettlebell a couple times on either side. Uh, and I think that that's the exact way that you should look at it. The reason the one arm snatch was just such a popular movement among these people, and again, this was before they really kind of codified weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting, into a narrower number of movements, and before powerlifting was even an idea in anybody's head. These one arm movements were super duper popular because they require a great degree of strength, coordination, athleticism, and just a litany of other qualities: mobility, flexibility, speed, anything you could think of. As a matter of fact, one of the theories as to why some of these smaller guys were able to put up these incredible numbers is because their normal sized stature allowed them to do stuff that heavyweights typically couldn't do. They were able to be very explosive. They were able to be very mobile. They were able to have this sort of like gymnastic level of coordination throughout the full body. So it was a lot less common for the heavyweights like Hackenschmidt and Charles Rigoulot, those being the exceptions. It was a lot less common for those guys to be able to do it because generally they were so much bigger, but they were also tighter. They didn't move as well, and so on down the line. So how does this all play into the kettlebell snatch? Well, I still think that even though, again, one arm barbell snatch, even a heavy dumbbell snatch, these movements are just super impressive, and they're certainly worth doing if you're at all interested in them. But they're a lot less friendly, I think, to most trainees. And in part, it's because you have to have so many other qualities ready and raring to go before you can even begin them. So, like with the barbell, trying to grab a 7-foot Olympic bar in the middle and then throw it over your head, it's very likely to tip and twist and all this other stuff. And so you need to have like obscenely good grip strength and coordination and all these other things. So it's just not very approachable by most people. And even the dumbbell snatch, honestly, it's like, if you've ever seen it performed, it's not done quite like a kettlebell. There's usually a split snatch sort of movement with the lower body, which is where you provide that initial impetus and you sort of jump into a lunge, and then you catch it overhead and then stand up, which is great. I'm a huge fan of doing that. But again, for most people, that requires several other levels of skill that they may not yet have. And also, I think that the arc of dumbbell snatch tends to be a little bit too round. I mean, the snatch used to be just called like the overhead swing in some circles, specifically because, I mean, it was a swing and then it just ended up overhead. Whereas in the kettlebell world, and particularly with hardstyle kettlebell training, there is a particular taming of the arc that allows you to be able to stand in place with a bilateral stance, meaning just 2 feet parallel to one another, and be able to do this movement over and over again. And so it's still a very technical lift. It's still the sort of a thing that you have to practice and really work on getting good at, but it's also the sort of a thing that you can realistically expect to get better at more quickly, and I think the biggest benefit of them all is that you can use this momentum from the hip hinge and you can use it repeatedly. Big issue in growing older, for instance, is what has been termed dynopenia, which is like the wasting away of your ability to generate explosive power, your ability to move quickly. And traditional ways of training explosive power in the sports training, for instance, the Olympic lifts, cleans, snatches, things like that, as well as jumping, sprints, all movements that I'm a big fan of. They're a lot less approachable by most people, whereas ballistic kettlebell movements, swings, cleans, snatches, things of that nature, are much more approachable by and large. So the nice thing about all this means that number one, you got a little bit of inspiration looking back at all these spectacular luminaries from the dawn of the golden era of strength training and strongman and weightlifting and all this other stuff. But it also gives you an idea of how you can make it appropriate for yourself and get a lot more out of the movement than just bragging rights. One rep with 165 pounds at 147 pounds of body weight, such as what Maxick did, is incredible. But for most people, like the juice just isn't worth the squeeze to try to get that much weight overhead. What most people really want is they want that sort of athletic explosiveness. They want that full body coordination, the strength, power, the mental toughness. They want the fat burning. The snatch is one of the best movements out there for just like blowtorching fat off of the body. And you get so much out of it as well. And again, I think the kettlebell is still the king of snatching movements for people for whom training is something that they treat seriously, but they don't make any money from doing, meaning they're not a professional. And I just think that, if you have any ambitions to climb to the higher levels of the world of kettlebell hoisting, again, not competitively, but just in terms of all around performance, getting really good at kettlebell snatches is definitely the way to go. And it's got a nice old school hardcore pedigree to it. So you know that you are jumping in to a long line of badasses. And you can do that with a big smile on your face. Once, of course, your heart rate comes down and you're not breathing as heavily anymore. And you're able to speak once again, because the snatch is certainly going to challenge you quite a bit in that and many other ways. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, I encourage you to share, subscribe if you have not already. Particularly as far as the share thing is concerned. If you think anybody would like to hear my missives on a more regular basis and just are not familiar with my chattering, let's say, then send them this episode. Maybe they'll dig it. Who knows? Maybe they'll start taking up kettlebell training. Maybe they'll get the 9-minute challenge and they'll get started off on the right foot. And maybe they'll give you a big thank you later on down the road. I know I will, for sure, because my whole goal in life is to help people crush weakness and demystify the process of doing that. And I can't do it alone. I certainly need all the help I can get from all the other enthusiasts out there, just like you. Thank you for listening. And as always, have fun and happy training.